2 weeks ago, I briefed the media and testified in Congress that our immigration system was at the breaking point. That breaking point has arrived this week at our border.
On today's podcast, we're going to spend a little more time exploring the crisis on the U.S. southern border. That's coming up right now on the Hot Zone.
This is the Hot Zone. Engaging with the news in a whole new way, international war correspondent Chuck Holton brings insight into areas of crisis and lets you help those affected.
Hey folks, I'm Chuck Holton. Thanks for being with us. I just got back from the airport. I actually was on the border of Venezuela once again in Cúcuta, Colombia, and we're going to talk some more about what I did there over the last few days. But I went there straight from the U.S. southern border, and I was down there reporting on the absolute crisis that's taking place there. It's hard to even describe how incredibly bad it has gotten in El Paso and along the U.S. southern border. So I've got a piece airing today on the Christian Broadcasting Network about my trip to the U.S. southern border to talk about what's going on in El Paso with the absolute crisis. The levels of people coming into this country illegally are absolutely off the charts. And anybody who says it isn't a problem either is naive or they're lying to you. So I want you to explore a little further with me the crisis that is our southern border right now. While I was there, I got to talk to some people who live in El Paso who are experiencing it firsthand. And I got to talk to some ranchers who live 100 miles or so to the west of El Paso out in New Mexico. And we're going to go talk to them as well. As border crossings break records and migrants pour onto American streets, President Trump is going to the source. Saturday, the State Department announced aid cuts to El Salvador, Honduras, and Guatemala.
We were paying them tremendous amounts of money, and we're not paying them anymore because they haven't done a thing for us.
Mexico is also on notice, with President Trump threatening to shut down the border if action isn't taken to stop the trafficking.
I'm not playing games. Mexico has to stop it. They have people coming right through Mexico.
The Border Patrol predicts that numbers of illegal crossers into the U.S. will hit as many as 100,000 in March alone, and many of them are families. Up above on the bridge, dozens of families wait in line for up to 2 weeks to come in legally. But these migrants have jumped the line by entering illegally between the ports of entry. Now that they're on American soil, they must be given a court date. And with a system already crushed under the weight of more than 1 million asylum seekers, these Central American families know they'll be allowed to live in the United States for up to 3 years before they get their day in court. On Wednesday, Border Patrol Commissioner Kevin McAleenan visited the El Paso border fence to brief journalists about the crisis, and his message was a call for help.
Here in El Paso, we have almost 3,500 migrants in custody this morning, in facilities designed for many fewer. We had over 1,000 apprehensions in this one sector alone on Monday, and encounters at our port of entry. The vast majority, again, families from Central America. And all of this is coming into facilities designed for short-term holds of single adults. This humanitarian mission, which we're committed to, is undermining our border security efforts.
The Commissioner of the Border Patrol is here today in El Paso, and he's been giving a briefing to a whole bunch of journalists here along the border. What he's telling us is that they've picked up over 4,000 people the last 2 days, each day, alone, and that their facilities are absolutely, completely overwhelmed. And so we see these migrants behind me that are being kept underneath the bridge to Juarez and being fed, being given water, medical care. The Border Patrol is doing everything they can to treat them humanely. And the problem is they just don't have the agents and they just don't have the resources. And so now the commissioner is saying they're going to have to just let these people leave.
2 weeks ago, I briefed the media and testified in Congress that our immigration system was at the breaking point. That breaking point has arrived this week at our border. CBP is facing an unprecedented humanitarian and border security crisis all along our southwest border, and nowhere has that crisis manifested more acutely than here in El Paso. On Monday and Tuesday, CBP started the day with over 12,000 migrants in our custody. As of this morning, that number was 13,400. A high number for us is 4,000. A crisis level is 6,000. 13,000 is unprecedented. On Monday, we saw the highest total of apprehensions and encounters in over a decade, with 4,000 migrants either apprehended or encountered at ports of entry in a single day. That was Monday. Yesterday, we broke the record again with 4,117. We are now on pace for over 100,000 apprehensions and encounters with migrants in March, with 90% of those, 90,000 people, crossing the border illegally between ports of entry. March will be the highest month since 2008. The arriving flows are made up primarily of Central American families and unaccompanied children.
As if to prove his point, just as the commissioner was set to begin speaking, a group from El Salvador crossed the Rio Grande and turned themselves in right in front of the group of assembled journalists.
These groups cannot be repatriated expeditiously and instead are almost guaranteed to be released to remain in the U.S. indefinitely, regardless of the merits of their immigration or asylum claim. The last time we had crossings near this level, they were almost all single adults from Mexico who could be swiftly repatriated. There's a big difference. To put this in more recent context, in March, we will see over 55,000 family units alone. In March of 2017, when we were at historic lows, we saw 16,794 crossings total, including all demographics, adults, families, and children. This stark and increasing shift to more vulnerable populations, combined with overwhelming numbers and inadequate capacity to detain families and children at ICE and Health and Human Services, respectively, is creating a humanitarian crisis. In March, almost 40,000 children will come into CBP's custody after making a harrowing journey in the hands of violent and callous human smugglers through Mexico. The danger of violent assault on that journey, the potential for a tragic incident in the crossing or in overwhelmed CBP facilities and transportation networks is clear and present. It's going to be 85 degrees in El Paso today. The danger increases for all of those crossing our border unlawfully as it gets hotter. The same criminal organizations that are smuggling migrants, profiting from them, abusing them in the journey, are benefiting from our reduced security presence. They're bringing drugs, they're bringing adults who are trying to evade capture behind those families as we're bogged down with large groups.
But not everyone agrees there's a crisis. During the commissioner's speech, a small group of protesters held signs and chanted slogans in front of a giant inflatable effigy of the U.S. president. Their message? Border Patrol are the criminals, and America should have no borders at all. Thousands of migrants are overwhelming city shelters and ministries in cities along the southern border, putting financial strain on local governments and nonprofits as well. It's also using up resources from the Border Patrol, which only makes the crisis worse.
While 65% of crossings are now families and children, who most often present themselves to Border Patrol agents, 35% are still single adults who try to evade apprehension at our border. And within that flow are thousands of criminals, smugglers, gang members, and public safety threats that we're sworn to protect this country from.
No one really knows how many illegals enter the U.S. without being caught. Here in New Mexico, 100 miles west of El Paso, the human tidal wave has left the Border Patrol unable to cover this remote stretch of desert where these ranchers live. So I got to meet a very interesting family. Joe Johnson is a rancher whose family has been farming out there in New Mexico right along the U.S. southern border for over 100 years. And they've got an absolutely mammoth piece of land that they ranch out there. They've got about 1,500 head of cattle. And get this, 160,000 acres. Like, that's a state. If they don't have their own zip code, I don't know why. 160,000 acres is hard to even comprehend. But they only have 8 miles of U.S. border with Mexico. And they have talked a lot about, while I was there, just how costly it is for them because the Border Patrol is no longer there to help out. Check this out.
This right here is what the Border Patrol calls 19 Canyon, right here. And we've been told many times we ought to stay out of here because of the danger aspect of it. But we can't. We have to keep an eye on our border. And this is where we've had a lot of cattle stolen right here in this draw right here.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the fence right there, isn't it?
That's the fence. And it looks shitty. I mean,
It's a whole lot of nothing.
it's had thousands of people trample over it, vehicles driven through it. I mean, it's old.
My name's Russell Johnson. I'm a fourth generation out here to be ranching with my family. And this is the barrier that we've got in one stretch of the area that my family farms. And as you can see, it serves no purpose to stop vehicles or people. It's been cut multiple times. You can step right over it. I mean, it does nothing to stop illegal traffic from coming through. It's not even a deterrent.
I'm currently in northern Mexico, right on the U.S. southern border. And I'm going to cross into the United States right now. And I want to show you just how quickly I can do this. Just how quick can I get over the border. Here I am, and I'm in the United States, just like that.
Our sheriff's department is spread thin as it is, and so we rely heavily on Border Patrol for our only form of law enforcement out here. And so with this influx of people drawing down the manpower within the Border Patrol, we're basically left lawless out here.
2008, there was a five-wire barbed wire fence there, and they put in this Normandy barrier, which, in my opinion, is not useful. It doesn't stop human traffic, and it also doesn't stop vehicle traffic. If they choose to, they can cut it or ramp over it. And in our case, it doesn't go throughout the whole border here on us. There's only about approximately five miles of vehicle barrier, and the rest of it's just the five-wire barbed wire fence. So
They just go around it.
They just go around it.
This is 3 miles of continuous barbed wire fence that we maintain at our expense, and we're the only ones that look at it. Border Patrol doesn't even look at it. Their patrol basically stops at the end of this vehicle barrier right here, and we're left to keep an eye on the rest of it.
So there's 3.5 miles of this just on your property.
Yes.
And anybody that wants, I mean, there's absolutely, it's barely even a speed bump.
Right. There's not much deterrent right here with this barbed wire fence.
So what would you say is the biggest threat to you and your family because of the state of this barrier?
Well, first and foremost, it's always our safety. There's nothing here that's going to deter a vehicle from coming through, that's going to be speeding down the roads that my family travels. That's not going to stop a criminal alien from coming across and potentially doing harm to my family. And that's first and foremost our concern, is our family safety. And then secondly, it's our business. If this fence goes down because of a vehicle drive-through or people stomping on it, all of our livestock could potentially go into Mexico, and that's how we put beans on the table.
But it's a struggle for us every day. And a very worrisome. I think the only way that things are going to get better is build a wall on this border.
The Hot Zone is produced by Amy Holton and Livefire Media. Copyright 2019.